The Quantico sky hung low, a gray shroud cloaking the cemetery gates, as if the heavens themselves stood in mourning. Early fall brushed the hills with rust, and a faint breeze stirred the American flags, their edges trembling like whispered prayers of the fallen. I stood alone, an old man in a faded uniform, my shoulders bowed not by defeat, but by the weight of years, clutching a wilted white lily wrapped in a frayed strip of cloth. Its petals curled, fragile as the memories they held, yet to me, it was secreta tether to Marcus Connors, my brother in arms, a four-star general whose name burned across the nation's headlines while mine had dissolved into silence. My uniform, once a proud deep green, had faded to gray-blue, its brass buttons dulled by time, but I'd pressed it with reverence, polished my boots until they gleamed, and tilted my hat just so, as if the act could summon the soldier I'd been. No medals adorned my chest, no ribbons boasted my deedsomely, a single patch clung to my shoulder. 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, Ghost Company, a shadow unit history had all but erased. 5 hours by bus from Roanoke, a transfer in Richmond under a sky heavy with clouds, and a weary trek to these gates. I came not for glory, not for recognition, but to say goodbye to a man who'd called me brother when the world knew him only as a hero. The young sergeant at the gate didn't lift his eyes, his face a mask of cold authority. "Restricted area, sir," he barked, voice sharp as a bayonet. 4-star general's funeral, no clearance, no entry. I met his gaze, my pale blue eyes clouded at the edges but steady, carrying the weight of a lifetime's battles. "I'm here to pay respects," I said, my voice low, like gravel crunching under boots. He sneered, his eyes raking over my wrinkled hands, my worn shoes, the lily trembling in my grip as if it feared his scorn. "You family?" he pressed, his tone dripping with doubt. "No," I replied, slow and deliberate. "I served with him, long ago." His lip curled, a dismissive snort escaping. "No credentials, no entry. Step aside, old man, or I'll have you dragged off." I didn't flinch. Arguments were for those who crave the spotlight, and I'd chosen silence decades ago. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said, voice steady despite the sting of his words. "Trouble or not, you're not getting in," he snapped, stepping closer, his hand twitching toward his radio. "Last chance move, or I call security." "You don't understand," I said, my voice low but firm, the lily trembling in my hand. "I was with him at Khe Sanh. I owe him this." "Khe Sanh?" he scoffed, his voice rising, drawing the eyes of nearby guards. "That was 50 years ago. You think that gets you a free pass? Get out of here before I lose my patience." I held his gaze, my heart a steady drumbeat, the weight of memory anchoring me. "I'm not leaving," I said, voice quiet but unyielding, "not until I've said goodbye." His face reddened, his hand gripping the radio, his voice a snarl. "You're testing me, old man. One more word, and you're in cuffs. You think you're special because you wore a uniform once?" "I don't think I'm special," I said, my voice calm, cutting through his rage. "I just think Marcus deserves better than a locked gate." "Marcus?" he spat, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get to call General Connors that. You're nobody, and you're done here." A second guard stepped forward, his voice calmer but firm, his eyes flicking to my patch. "Sarge, maybe we check with the CO. That's Ghost Company. Could be legit." "Legit?" the sergeant roared, turning on his subordinate, his voice echoing across the gate. "He's nobody. Look at him, faded jacket, no ID, waving a damn flower like it means something. You want to risk your career for this?" "It's Ghost Company," the second guard said, his voice dropping, a hint of awe breaking through. "My dad told me stories. We should check, Sarge." "Stories," the sergeant bellowed, his face a storm. "This ain't a history lesson. He's out, or we're both in trouble." "Check it," I said, my voice quiet but firm, the lily's petals crumbling in my hand. "You'll see." "You don't give orders here," the sergeant snapped, his finger jabbing at me. "You're nothing but a has-been, and I'm done with you." "Then call your CO, I said, my voice steady, unyielding. "But I'm not moving." I stood still, the lily my anchor, as the hum of bagpipes and the mournful wail of taps drifted from within. Officers in crisp uniforms, foreign dignitaries, the Secretary of Defense, they gathered for Marcus, their faces solemn, while I stood outside, a relic of wars the world had forgotten. My mind slipped back to Khe Sanh, February 1968, the siege clawing at us for 77 days, mortars thundering, bunkers collapsing, nights where smoke and fog were one. I was 29, a sergeant, older than the boys around me, their faces still soft with youth, their eyes bright with fear or defiance. On day 34, gunfire cracked near the runway, and a voice screamed over the comms, raw and desperate. "Connor's comms guys hit. We're outside the wire, taking fire from the tree line." I didn't wait for orders, I never did. Grabbing 2 smoke grenades and clipping a flare to my vest, I ran through the chaos, no cover, no backup, only instinct driving me. I found them behind a splintered shack, its wood no match for the enemy's wrath. Marcus, his face scratched, ankle busted, dragging his radio pack with one hand. Lieutenant Andrew Price, fresh from West Point, shielding him with a shaking pistol and raw courage. "Who the hell are you?" Price snapped, his voice trembling with fear and defiance, his eyes wide as bullets sang overhead. "No time for names," I growled, tossing smoke to cloak us from the tree line's deadly gaze. "Move, or you're dead." "You're crazy," he shouted, his pistol slipping as he stumbled, his breath ragged. "We're pinned." "Less talking, more running," I barked, hauling them both by their jackets, tracers hissing through the haze, the jungle erupting in flame. "Keep your head down, Lieutenant," I yelled as Price tripped, his voice a mix of panic and awe. "You're gonna get us killed," he screamed, but he followed, his steps faltering. "Already doing that myself," I shot back, my voice steady despite the blood seeping from my shoulder. By the time I threw them over the wire, the gash was warm, unheated. I didn't feel it, not then. "You're hit," Marcus rasped, his voice hoarse, his eyes locked on my wound as he lay panting on the ground. "Doesn't matter," I said, shoving him toward safety, my voice firm. "Keep moving, kid." "You saved us," Price said, his voice shaking, his face pale under the grime, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What's your name?" "Doesn't matter," I repeated, my voice flat, turning away. "Get to the medics, now." "Why won't you tell me?" Price pressed, his voice rising, desperate. "We owe you." "You don't owe me nothing," I said, my voice low, final. "Just stay alive." They offered me a citation for valor, a medal to pin on my chest. I refused. "Just did my job," I told them, my voice unyielding, my eyes on the horizon. "Save it for someone who needs it." After my final tour, I vanished, slipping into a quiet life in Roanoke, carrying only the weight of those nights, the echo of Marcus's voice, and a letter from him. Its words folded close to my heart, heavy with a debt I never sought. Another memory flickered. Laos, 1971, Ghost Recon. Marcus and I, shadows in a jungle where death hid in every leaf. I pulled him from a burning outpost, his legs shattered, bullets singing their deadly hymn. "You're gonna make it," I told him, my voice steady as I carried him through the night, my own wounds ignored. "Don't you die on me, kid." "Always saving my ass," he muttered, his laugh weak but alive, his hand gripping mine, his eyes bright with trust. "Someone's gotta," I said, and we made it to dawn, to safety. He called me brother, even then, when the world saw only his rising star, while I faded into the shadows. Another moment surfaced. Vietnam, 1969, a quiet night by a river, the stars a rare comfort. Marcus, still a lieutenant, handed me a flask, his voice soft. "You ever think about home, Frank?" "Every damn day," I said, taking a sip, the burn of whiskey grounding me. "But this is where I'm needed." "You're needed there too," he said, his eyes serious, searching mine. "Don't disappear on me when this is over." I didn't answer, just passed the flask back, my silence a promise I knew I'd break. Another memory on 1970, a firebase, Marcus now a captain, finding me cleaning my rifle. "Why'd you turn down the medal, Frank?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. "Didn't need it," I said, not looking up, my hand steady on the weapon. "Got you out, that's enough." "It's not enough for me," he said, his voice fierce, his hand gripping my shoulder. "You're more than you let on." I shrugged, my voice flat. "Just a soldier, Marcus, like you." He shook his head, his eyes burning with a fire I couldn't match. "No, Frank, you're the one who keeps us alive, don't you ever forget that." At Quantico, I stood by the wall, the lily trembling, unaware that eyes had found me. Colonel Logan Marks, one of Marcus's aides, spotted my patch through the Iron Bar's ghost company, a ghost itself for 50 years. He whispered to General Michael Thurman, and the ceremony froze. Bagpipes fell silent. The honor guard stiffened. Thurman marched to the gate, his ceremonial saber glinting as he handed it off. The sergeant stepped in front of me, fists clenched, his face a storm of defiance. "He's not cleared, sir," he shouted, voice trembling but bold. "He's got no business here." Thurman's eyes blazed, a general's authority crackling like lightning. "Stand down, soldier, or I'll have your stripes by sundown," he roared, stepping closer, his presence towering. "He's not on the list," the sergeant fired back, face red, refusing to yield. "I don't care who he is." Thurman leaned in, his voice low, lethal, each word a blade. "He's on mine, son. This is Franklin Hayes, the man who saved Connor's life twice. You'll show respect, or you'll answer to me, and I promise you won't like the consequences." The sergeant froze, mouth open, his bravado crumbling. "I didn't know, sir," he stammered, stepping aside, his eyes darting to the ground. "Didn't know?" Thurman snapped, his voice cutting like a whip. "You're standing on sacred ground, and you didn't ask. Learn his name, soldier, because it's worth more than your rank." The second guard, quieter, spoke up, his voice hesitant. "General, should we log him as an exception?" "Exception?" Thurman growled, turning on him, his eyes flashing. "He's not an exception, he's the reason we're here. Log that, and make it quick." I shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of their eyes, the lily's petals crumbling in my hand. "General, it's not necessary." Thurman turned to me, saluting sharply, the motion slicing through the air like a vow. "Sir, we've been waiting for you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, a crack in his general's armor. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of his words unsteadying me. "With respect, Hayes, shut the hell up," he cut in, his voice cracking, raw with conviction. "You earned this 100 times over, and I'll be damned if we let you stand out here alone." "I'm not here for this," I said, my voice rising, a spark of defiance breaking through. "I just wanted to say goodbye." "And you will," Thurman said, his voice fierce, unyielding. "But you'll do it inside, with the honor you deserve, whether you like it or not." An aide stepped forward, bearing a polished wooden box, its surface gleaming like a promise kept. Thurman placed it in my trembling hands, the weight anchoring me to the earth. "Connor's ashes," he said, his words a solemn vow. "He wanted you to bring him home to the brothers never named in the press, who saved lives no one knew about." I stared at the box, my breath catching, the lily forgotten in my grip. "I thought you all forgot," I murmured, the words slipping out like a confession, raw and unguarded, my voice trembling with a grief I'd carried for decades. Thurman's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening, a general brought low by memory. "Never, Frank," he said, voice breaking, a tear tracing his cheek. "Not in 1,000 years. Not while I draw breath. Marcus made us swear it." "Swear what?" I asked, my voice rough, the box heavy in my hands, my heart pounding with the weight of his words. "That we'd find you," he said, his voice fierce, unyielding, his hand gripping my shoulder. "That we'd make this right. You saved him, Frank. You saved us all, and we'll carry that debt to our graves." "I didn't do it for debts," I said, my voice low, almost a plea. "I did it because he was my brother." "And that's why it matters," Thurman said, his voice softening but still fierce, "because you didn't ask for anything, because you gave everything." Behind him, Ghost Company veterans, their faces etched with the scars of time, rose from their chairs, frail hands saluting as I crossed the gate. The box was heavy with more than a chaise, it held a life, a debt, a brotherhood forged in fire and blood. Thurman walked beside me, his silence a companion, as officers stood at attention, not for a general adorned with stars, but for me, a name they didn't know. My steps were slow, each one a bridge to the past. I remembered Laos again, nights of whispered plans, Marcus's laugh cutting through the fear, the weight of his trust as I carried him to safety. "You're gonna owe me a drink," I'd teased, my voice steady despite the blood soaking my side. "Name the place," he'd gasped, his hand gripping mine, his eyes bright with life. I never named it, and he never forgot. Another memory: Vietnam, 1970, a firebase, Marcus now a captain, finding me cleaning my rifle. "Why'd you turn down the medal, Frank?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. "Didn't need it," I said, not looking up, my hand steady on the weapon. "Got you out, that's enough." "It's not enough for me," he said, his voice fierce, his hand gripping my shoulder. "You're more than you let on." I shrugged, my voice flat. "Just a soldier, Marcus, like you." He shook his head, his eyes burning with a fire I couldn't match. "No, Frank, you're the one who keeps us alive. Don't you ever forget that." Another momentone 1969, a quiet night by a river, the stars a rare comfort. Marcus, still a lieutenant, handed me a flask, his voice soft. "You ever think about home, Frank?" "Every damn day," I said, taking a sip, the burn of whiskey grounding me. "But this is where I'm needed." "You're needed there too," he said, his eyes serious, searching mine. "Don't disappear on me when this is over." I didn't answer, just passed the flask back, my silence a promise I knew I'd break. I stopped short of the canopy, the urn anchoring me, the crowd a sea of uniforms, their faces solemn, some hidden behind dark glasses to mask their tears. A young lieutenant approached, clipboard in hand, his voice hesitant, but edged with protocol. "Sir, you're not on the roster," he said, glancing nervously at his sheet. "Are you with the family?" I shook my head, my voice low. "No." "Press?" he pressed, his tone sharpening, drawing eyes from nearby officers. "No." "Then who are you?" he demanded, his voice rising, a challenge that echoed across the field. "This is a state funeral, you can't just walk in here." "3rd Recon Battalion, Charlie Company, Quezon 68, I said, my voice low, even, cutting through his bluster like a blade. "I'm not here for your roster, son. I'm here for Marcus." He blinked, flustered, his face reddening. That's not." "It wouldn't be," I said, gentle but firm, the lily's petals crumbling in my hand. "I don't need your permission to say goodbye." "You're out of line," he snapped, stepping closer, his voice sharp enough to draw a crowd. "I don't care what you claim you did 50 years ago. You're not cleared, and you're not getting in." "Do what you gotta do," I said, turning my gaze to the horizon, the flags fluttering behind marble columns. "I'm calling my CO, he said, his voice trembling with anger. "You stay right there, or you're done." A grizzled master sergeant nearby, his chest heavy with ribbons, overheard and stepped in, his voice low but firm. "Easy, Lieutenant, that's Ghost Company on his shoulder. You sure you want to push this?" "Ghost Company?" The lieutenant scoffed, his voice dripping with disbelief. "That's a myth, he's just some old guy stirring trouble." "Myth?" the master sergeant growled, his eyes narrowing, his voice a rumble. "I served with men who knew them. You're standing in front of one, and you're making a fool of yourself. Back off, or you'll regret it." The lieutenant hesitated, his face paling, but he held his ground. "I'll have your rank for this, Sergeant." "Try it," the master sergeant said, his voice a low thunder, "but you'll answer to General Price first." "You're both out of line," the lieutenant snapped, his voice shaking with rage. "This is my post, and I say he's out." "Then you're a damn fool," the master sergeant said, stepping closer, his voice a growl. "That man's a hero, and you're too green to know it." Across the field, a captain, mid-40s, bronze star on his chest, watched the exchange. He caught Price's eye, and something passed between thema recognition, a spark. The captain moved swiftly, intercepting the lieutenant. "What's the holdup?" he asked, voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Some old guy, says he served at Quezon, but he's not cleared," the lieutenant said, exasperated, pointing at me. "He's causing a scene." "Scene?" the captain snapped, his eyes locking on me, then my patch. "That's Ghost Company. Quezon, you sure about this, Lieutenant?" I nodded, silent, the lily's dust on my fingers, a quiet testament to my truth. The captain didn't hesitate. "Get me the general, now, and you," he turned to the lieutenant, his voice a whip, "stand down before you embarrass yourself further." "Sir, I." "Now," the captain barked, his voice a command that brooked no argument, his eyes flashing with authority. Minutes later, a low hum broke the silence engines, heavy and deliberate. A convoy rolled through the tree-lined 3 matte black vehicles, escort flags snapping, a limousine gleaming like a mirror. The crowd rose, a tide of reverence, as General Andrew Price stepped out, his ceremonial uniform resplendent with gold braid, white gloves, and a sword at his side. He wore no sunglasses, his face unadorned by pageantry, only focus, only intention. He didn't head to the casket or podium, he came for me. Murmurs rippled, a wind through dry grass, but Price's glare silenced them. He ripped off his gloves, saluted, and stood inches from me, his presence a storm. "I told Marcus I'd find you," he said, voice low, fierce, cutting through the air like a blade. "He never stopped searching, Frank. Not for 50 years, not for a single damn day." I met his eyes, seeing the young lieutenant who trembled under fire, his courage raw and untested. "I didn't ask for this, Andrew," I said, my voice rough, raw, the lily crumbling in my grip. "You don't get it," he shot back, eyes blazing like the jungle that night. "Marcus left one order, you bring him home. You hear me? You don't get to walk away from that." "I'm nobody," I said, voice breaking, the years of silence pouring out like blood from an old wound. "You're nobody?" he roared, stepping closer, his voice a growl, each word a hammer. "You're Ghost Recon, Frank. You're the man who gave us everything. Don't you dare call that nothing. Don't you dare shame Marcus by pretending you're less than he knew you were." "I never wanted this," I shouted, my voice cracking, raw with defiance, the lily's petals dust, scattering like my resolve. "And that's why it's yours," he snapped, his voice softening, his eyes a firestorm of pain and gratitude. "Because you didn't ask, because you gave, and left like it didn't matter, but it mattered, Frank, to Marcus, to me, to every man who's alive because of you." "I did my job," I said, my voice shaking, a spark of defiance fading under the weight of his words. "That's all it was, Andrew." "Your job?" he roared, his voice breaking, his hand slamming into his chest. "Your job was to die for us, Frank, to die. And you didn't. You lived, and you bled, and you carried us through hell. You think we can just forget that? You think we can let you stand out here like some stranger?" "I am a stranger," I said, my voice low, bitter, the truth of years alone spilling over. "To them, to this world. I don't belong here." "You belong more than any of us," he said, his voice fierce, almost desperate, his eyes burning with a truth I couldn't face. "And I'll fight anyone who says otherwise, every soldier, every general, every damn politician in this cemetery." An aide handed him the box again, and he thrust it into my hands, his grip lingering. His eyes locked on mine. "Do it, Frank, for Marcus, for all of us." Camera shutters clicked, but Price spun on the crowd, his voice thunder. "Enough," he roared, silencing them, his fist clenched. "Put those damn cameras down or I'll break them myself." He grabbed the microphone meant for the eulogy, no script, just truth, his voice a battle cry across the field. "Listen up, all of you. There are moments in this life that outlive the battlefield, moments that define us not by medals, but by debts we can't repay. This man," he pointed at me, his hand steady, his eyes fierce, "saved Marcus Connors at 19, saved me in 68. Every soldier we trained, every mission we led, exists because of Franklin Hayes. You hear me? He's the reason we're here." A voice from the crowd, sharp and skeptical, cut through. "He's not even on the list, General. Why's he here?" Price's eyes flashed, his voice a whip cracking. "He's Ghost Recon, Laos 71, you ignorant fool. He's the reason Connors became a legend, the reason I'm here. You call him nobody, and I'll have you out of that uniform before you blink." Another voice, quieter but bold, dared, "Why's he above protocol, sir?" Price's face hardened, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, each word dripping with fury. "Protocol? Protocol didn't save my life in Khe Sanh. Protocol didn't carry Marcus through a burning jungle. Franklin Hayes did. If that's not enough for you, get the hell out of my cemetery because you don't belong here." A third voice, hesitant, from a young officer, "But the regulations." "Regulations be damned," Price bellowed, his voice shattering the air, his fist slamming the podium. "This is about honor, about debts that outlive rules. You want regulations? I'll give you one. Salute this man, or you're no soldier of mine." A fourth voice, from a civilian in a suit, piped up, "This is a state funeral, General. You can't just." "Can't?" Price roared, turning on the man, his voice a tempest, his eyes blazing. "I'm a 4-star general, and I say he walks, or this funeral stops. You want to test me? Try it, and see how fast you're out of here." A fifth voice, from an older officer, spoke up, cautious, "General, with respect, we need order." "Order," Price snapped, his voice a blade, cutting through the air. "Order is honoring the man who made this day possible. You want order? Salute Franklin Hayes, or get out of my sight." The silence shattered a single clap, then a wave, swelling like a tide as soldiers, generals, civilians rose, saluting, hats lifted, tears streaming down weathered faces. Veterans, old and trembling, stood beside canes, their patches faded but proud, their hands raised in shaky reverence. Price turned to me, his voice soft, almost pleading, a stark contrast to his fury. "Walk with me, Frank, please. Let us do this right." I hesitated, the urn's weight grounding me, the lily's dust on my fingers, a quiet testament to my truth. I nodded, my throat tight, my heart pounding. Shoulder to shoulder, we walked past stunned officers, journalists frozen in awe, wreaths bowing in the breeze. The honor guard parted, their silence a salute of its own. I placed the urn above the folded flag, not for protocol, but because it was right, because some debts are paid with remembrance, not ribbons pinned to a chest. Taps faded into the wind, leaving a silence heavier than death itself, a silence that held the weight of a life, of a bond unbroken by time. I stood by the pedestal, my hand resting on the urn, feeling Marcus's pulse in memory, the brother who called me so, even when stars adorned his shoulders. A young officer whispered to another nearby, his voice sharp with confusion, "Who is he, anyway?" The reply was fierce, cutting, "He's the one Price owes his life to, you idiot. Shut up and salute." Another voice, older, added, "Ghost Company. Khe-san, that's all you need to know." I didn't look at them. My eyes were on the urn, the lily's fragments scattered at my feet. A grizzled man in a faded jacket caught my eye, his voice rough but warm. "You saved my CO, Hayes. Never thought I'd see you again." "Just did my job," I said, voice low, but he shook his head, his salute unwavering. "Job, hell," he said, his voice breaking. "You're why we made it home, why my kids grew up with a father." "Don't owe me," I said, my voice soft, but he stepped closer, his eyes fierce. "I owe you everything," he said, his voice raw, trembling. "And I'll tell my grandkids your name, Hayes, you mark my words." At Price's gesture, I lifted the box and walked the central aisle. Soldiers saluted, Marines, Navy, Army, young and old, some with trembling hands, others sharp and strong. Veterans in civilian clothes rose, canes forgotten, hats off, tears tracing weathered cheeks. A woman, her face lined with age, her husband's medals pinned to her coat, called out, her voice trembling, "You're him, aren't you? The one Marcus wrote about?" I paused, the urn heavy in my hands. "Just a soldier, ma'am," I said, my voice low. She shook her head, tears falling. "No, you're his brother. He told me, years ago, said you saved him, then vanished. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, thank you." I nodded, unable to speak, and kept walking, the weight of her words a new burden I carried. By the family section, the cemetery stood as one, cameras stilled, whispers gone. In that moment, surrounded by rank and brass, I was the most honored man on the field, though I didn't bow or weep. I walked, step by step, each one a thread in a tapestry begun in the mud of Laos, now woven into the heart of a grateful nation. Later, at Marcus's grave, beneath oaks heavy with autumn, I knelt, my knees stiff with the weight of years. The headstone read, "Brother, Commander, Friend." I lit a stick of incense, its smoke curling skyward, a prayer without words. "I made it, kid," I whispered, my voice catching, raw with grief. "You always hated flowers, rest easy." I placed the lily by the stone, its petals dust in the wind, a final offering to a brother lost. Price stood behind me, still in full dress, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. He held a yellowed envelope, its edges frayed by time. "From Marcus's safe," he said, his voice tight, almost breaking. "Only if you came here, Frank." He was clear. I took it, the paper crackling like a dying fire under my fingers. "What's this?" I asked, my voice rough, wary, my heart pounding. "His last words to you," Price said, his eyes fierce, unyielding. "Read it. You owe him that." I opened it, hands unsteady, and read a paragraph written with a lifetime's care. "Frank, you never let me thank you. Not really. You saved me and vanished, like it didn't matter. But it did. You're the debt no medal, no command, no ceremony could repay. You let me live to serve, to lead, to die in peace. If there's justice, they'll say my name with yours, your friend, Marcus." I folded it, slipping it into my jacket, close to my heart, my throat tight with a grief I couldn't name. "I didn't do it for thanks," I said, voice raw, trembling with the weight of his words. Price's eyes locked on mine, fierce and unyielding, his voice a growl. "That's why it's yours, Frank. You don't get it, do you? You gave us everything, your blood, your years, your silence, and asked for nothing. That's why we're here, why we'll never forget." I shook my head, the weight of his words too heavy, the lily's dust on my fingers a reminder of my own fragility. "I'm just a soldier, Andrew," I said, voice breaking, the truth of my life laid bare. He stepped closer, his voice fierce, almost desperate, his hand gripping my arm. "You're not just anything. You're the reason Marcus became a legend, the reason I'm standing here, the reason half the men in that cemetery made it home. Stop running from that, Frank. Stop hiding." "I never ran," I said, my voice rising, a spark of defiance breaking through, my heart pounding. "I just didn't need the noise, the medals, the damn parades. I did what I did because it was right, not for your applause." Price's face softened, but his voice held an edge, a challenge, his eyes burning with a fire I couldn't match. "The noise is how we remember, Frank. The medals, the parades, they're not for you. They're for the ones who come after, the ones who need to know what sacrifice looks like, and I'll be damned if we let you fade into the shadows again." "I don't belong in your spotlight," I said, voice low, final, the incense smoke curling between us like a veil. "You don't get to decide that," he shot back, his voice fierce but warm, a brother's plea. "Not anymore. Marcus made sure of it, and so will I." "Then you're fighting a losing battle," I said, my voice soft, weary, the weight of years pressing down. "No, Frank," he said, his voice fierce, unyielding, his hand still on my arm. "I've been fighting for you since Quezon, and I'm not stopping now." A year later, under a spring sun, a crowd gathered as a ribbon fell across a stone archway, applause echoing through the air. The Franklin Hayes Center stood proud, a sanctuary for veterans, with counseling for wounds unseen, therapy for bodies broken, woodworking shops for hands that needed purpose, and a quiet memorial garden lined with names history had overlooked. Funded by the Marcus Connors Legacy Foundation, blessed by Price himself, it was a testament to a debt repaid, a thank you carved in stone. They waited for my speech, their eyes searching for the man whose name adorned the archway, but I stood aside, a dark coat over my shoulders, another wilted lily in hand, its petals curled but cherished. I watched young veterans cross the threshold, their steps hesitant but hopeful, entering a place born of service, not fame. No cameras sought me, no microphones pressed. A few nodded, their eyes knowing, and that was enough. Price joined me, his approach quiet, his presence a steady warmth. "Didn't want a building," I grunted, voice low, a faint smile tugging at my lips. He grinned, but his eyes were fierce, a spark of the young lieutenant I'd known. "It's not a building, Frank," he said, his voice unwavering. "It's a debt, carved in stone, for every man who gave more than he got." I glanced at the lily, its fragility a mirror of my own, then at the doors, where hope was taking root. "Will they come?" I asked, my voice soft, almost afraid of the answer. "They're here," he said, his voice fierce, certain, his eyes warm with pride. "And they'll keep coming, because of you." A young veteran approached, his face scarred, eyes uncertain, his voice rough. "You Hayes?" I nodded, bracing, the lily trembling in my hand. "They say you saved Connors," he said, his voice low, searching. "That true?" "Just did my job," I said, voice steady, my eyes on his. He scoffed, but his eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude breaking through. "Yeah, well, this place saved me, so, thanks." "Don't owe me," I said, my voice soft, but he shook his head, his voice fierce. I owe you everything, he said, his voice breaking, his hand gripping mine, and I'm not the only one. Price cut in, his voice sharp, unyielding. He's right, Frank. You don't get to shrug this off. You saved him, me, Marcus, hundreds of us. Get used to it. I didn't do it for this, I said, my voice low, weary, the lily's dust on my fingers. And that's why it matters, Price said, his voice fierce, his eyes burning. Because you didn't ask, because you're Franklin Hayes, and we'll never let you forget it. I walked away, alone, my steps steady, the lily dust in my hand, a quiet testament to a life of service. The world saw me now not with curiosity, but respect, their silent salutes a warmth I carried within. I bore debts unseen, burdens no one could name, but thanks to one walk, so did the nation I served. Kindness blooms in quiet places, where heroes need only know a burden's lifted, a heart healed. If these stories fade, history dies. Tell them, at Grateful Stories, where justice lives, kindness endures, and no quiet heroism is lost.